that's a song. The song we just sang, the title of it is The Canvas and the Clay. And that's a song that the lyrics have just been running through my head for several weeks. And part of that is because I have the incredible privilege of serving you and being your pastor. And I like to stand up here and talk to you, but I love being your pastor. I love the fact that you feel the freedom and the grace that you extend to me, because you come and you sit down with me and you share with me what's going on in your lives and what God is doing and the challenges that you face. And I get to pray with you. I get to help you through those things. And so often in those conversations, I'm struck by the reality that if I could just get to the place in my life, and if you and I together could just get to the place in our lives where we submit to the artist and the potter, and we allow him to paint the picture of our lives that he desires to paint, and we give him permission to mold us and shape us and make us like a potter molds a pot. Oh, how we would be amazed at what he does and how he works. You see, we live in a time and in an age where we're confronted over and over again with catastrophe. And the catastrophes of life threaten to overwhelm us at times, because over and over again we turn on our radio, we turn on the news on TV, we look at social media, and we're assaulted with the news of all the bad, horrible, terrible things happening in the world. And indeed, the definition of a catastrophe is that it's simply a disastrous event causing great damage and suffering. That's what a catastrophe is. But it's not just an event. It's the things that have been going on that have begun to challenge how we think and how we act and the decisions we make. Back in the early part of the 1800s, there was a philosopher by the name of Søren Kierkegaard. And he's considered one of the most influential philosophers of any modern time. And he said this. He said, each individual, not society or religion, each individual is solely responsible for giving meaning to life. And my friends, that is a lie. But it is a lie that has been perpetrated. It's a lie that has been repeated. It's a lie that has snuck in to all kinds of aspects of our life. And it has resulted in something that is so catastrophic that it is driving us as a people, as human beings, and especially as followers of Jesus, it's driving us to do something that is incredibly damaging, and that is to enter into comparison. Because we have bought into this philosophy that we're the ones responsible for our happiness, that we're the ones responsible for our livelihood, that we're the ones responsible to make something of ourselves. And because we've bought into that philosophy, we measure that by comparing ourselves to everybody around us. We look at what people post on social media, and if you haven't caught on yet, 99% of that is a lie. You know, we watch what people do, and we don't realize that they're acting in a play called life, and they're trying to portray themselves as different than they really are. And we ourselves participate in this grand scam, this sham of saying, well, I'm going to determine my value, my self-worth. I'm going to look at myself, and I'm going to evaluate who I am and what I am by looking at somebody else. And this is the ultimate result of two philosophies that have merged together in our time. One is called existentialism, and I've talked about this with you before, but it's really important that we keep reminding ourselves of how our culture is influencing us. Existentialism believes that each individual person is a free and responsible agent determining their own development, purpose, and destiny through acts of the will. I'm going to say it again. That's a lie. It is not how we develop, maintain purpose, or determine our destiny. And then we've combined that with something that's called nihilism. And nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is just meaningless, that knowledge is really not possible, and that reality doesn't actually exist. And when you look around us, if you listen to the lyrics of the songs that the culture is singing, if you watch the television shows that are being produced, if you read the novels that the major writers are sending out to us, you find that everything is meaningless, that it just isn't possible to know anything. And, well, reality is whatever you make it to be. And the result is what I have termed and what other people have labeled as existential nihilism, the belief that life has no intrinsic meaning, no intrinsic value, that a single human or even the entire human species is insignificant and without purpose. It's why I sit and I listen to high school students that I get to work with, that you allow me to go and do in the theater and drama program at Pekin High School, and I hear these students say, I wish I were dead. And I say to them, well, what's so bad about life? Why would you say that? Why would you say, I wish I were dead? Well, because I'm not making any difference. There's no meaning to life. Why do I exist? And in one way or another, they use all this language. And our reality is, friends, is that this is seeping into our psyche all over. And we allow this kind of philosophy to begin to impact us and to drive us into this comparison game. Because ultimately, when I come down to the bottom line and I peel away all the layers, whether it's a conversation with a high school kid or someone who is way past retirement age, who's struggling with these feelings of worthlessness and helplessness and meaninglessness, what I discover is that they've forgotten who they really are because they've been comparing themselves to other people. And that comparison just goes on, and it's like a domino effect. And we compare this and we compare that. We compare the kind of vehicle we drive, the house we live in, the job we have, how much we think somebody else has in their IRA or a 401k. We compare all these things, the kind of vacations we take. And we begin to value ourselves based on something that isn't even counted for eternity. I was a pastor in my first solo pastorate. I'd been on the staff of churches in the past, but I was in my first solo pastorate. It was a small church. When I went there, 55, 60 was a really good crowd. And I remember in the first couple of years getting notices and brochures, and back then it was all by snail mail, inviting me to a conference where I'm going to learn how to grow my church. And I looked at the expenses of this, and man, it cost money to register and to drive there and to have a hotel room and to eat and all this. And I go to this conference. And I remember coming home from that conference so discouraged that you could have mopped the floor and I wouldn't have minded if you used my hair to do it. Because everything was a comparison. And everything was this game of, oh, if you'll only follow my formula, you can fill up a 3,000-seat auditorium just like I do every week. If you do this and this and this and this, there's no reason why you can't have a staff of 80 people. I didn't even have 60 people in worship, and I was comparing myself to a church that had a staff of 80, right? But the comparison game drove me nuts. I was angry, I was hurt, I was bitter. It took me a long time to get past comparing myself even to something that's good, so that I could accept the fact, no, this is where God planted me, these are the gifts he gave me, these are the relationships he's put in my life, and this is who I'm called to be, not do. Because who we are in Christ is not determined by what we do. It's determined by who we are in him. Have you ever experienced that? The reality is I know you have. I know that some of you have walked into a farm show and you've looked at the equipment that's on display and you think, oh, if I only had that, everything would be okay. Because you're comparing yourself to what the ideal is as determined by some marketing company. I know that some of you have experienced this because you have said, if only my kids could go to this kind of school, if only they could have this kind of education, then everything would be okay. I know that some of you have experienced this because you've thought, well, if I had a job and I made as much money as that person makes, man, it would just be better. Everything would be better if that would happen. And we find ourselves in this trap of comparison, and we compare, and we compare, and we compare. And I'll tell you what's happening, my friends, it's driving us to despair and anxiety, and we're experiencing all kinds of problems because we cannot get a hold of what the real truth is. So this is what Paul writes to the church at Corinth. A church that is going gangbusters. This is the church everybody wants to be like, but that doesn't mean that they don't have any problems. And he says to them this, in 2 Corinthians, he says this. He says, our firm decision is to work from this focused center. And then he describes what that focused center is. One man died for everyone, and that puts everyone in the same boat. There's not one of you, and there's not anyone on this earth that Jesus didn't die for. And there's only one way to come to Jesus, and that is admit that you need him, and that he has something to offer you that's going to give you value. And then Paul goes on. He included everyone in his death so that everyone could also be included in his life. The promise, the reality is that all of us will experience a resurrected life just as Jesus experienced a resurrected life. And that's what Paul says. He says, what are we going to experience? A resurrected life. A resurrected life. A far better life than people ever lived on their own. He's writing this 2,000 years ago. And because of this decision, he says, we don't evaluate people by what they have or how they look. Comparison is done. It's out the window. We don't evaluate people that way. Because guess what? We learned a hard lesson. We looked at the Messiah that way once, and we got it all wrong. All you have to do is read the story of the Gospels. All you have to do is read the story of how close the people around Jesus were, to the reality that they were walking around eating and sleeping and drinking and doing life with God himself, and they missed it because they were comparing to everything else. I don't want to miss it. And Paul says we don't look at Jesus that way anymore. We just don't look at him that way anymore. Now, he says, we look inside, and what we see is that anyone united with the Messiah gets a fresh start and is created new. And Paul writes in the book of Romans, he puts it so simply. He says, this isn't complicated, my friends. If you confess with your mouth, Romans 10:9 and 10, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, master, king, leader, boss, king of your life. If you confess that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you're saved. It's not hard. It's not difficult. It's not complicated. But it requires a sense of giving God permission to do things that we don't even know he wants to do yet. Can you imagine yourself as a house? This is from C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest apologists and philosophers on Christianity that lived in the 20th century. Soren Kierkegaard was from the 19th century. C.S. Lewis from the 20th century, and he tells this story. He says, can you imagine yourself as a house? And you have said to God himself, come, I want you to take over my house. And when he first comes in, he does all the logical things. He fixes that toilet that keeps running where you have to rattle the handle all the time. You know, and he takes care of the leak in the roof that you've had 3 roofers out and no one can find out where it's coming from, but he knows and he gets that fixed. And he takes care of the door that every time you open or close it, you have to lift it up a little bit to get it to latch. He takes care of you expected him to do that, right? That's what you expected him to do. But then he starts to do the unexpected. He tears down this wall. And he puts a whole new wing off on this house. And you think, that hurt. What is going on here? And then he goes over on this side and he starts to build a tower. And the tower is dozens of stories tall. And it begins to take a toll on you and you say, wait a minute, nobody else in the neighborhood has a tower like that with their house. You don't understand, God. You're going to price me out of the market. I'm not going to have any resale value. And we start comparing right off the bat, don't we? And you know what happens is we take back permission from God. When he was doing the things we expected, fixing the toilet, the leak in the roof, the door that didn't latch right, we had no problem with that. No problem, God, go for it. But then he starts to do what we don't want to do. And we take back permission. We say, no, God, That's way too uncomfortable. That's outside my comfort zone. You're asking me to do things and latch onto things and make changes. I'm going to be different than anybody else around me. No, God, nope. Not for me. We take back that permission because we don't want to deal with the pain. We don't want to deal with being different. We don't want to deal with what God wants to do with us and in us and through us. And so we say, no, God, I'm done. And when we do that, we can't call him Lord anymore. Because the very meaning of the term is king and master and boss and leader of your life. And we start comparing ourselves, and we find ourselves back in this cycle, back in this trap of looking at life and saying, okay, God, what are you trying to do here? This isn't working right. And at the same time, not giving him permission to do what he wants to do. This is what Paul says, again, to the church at Corinth. He says it this way. You realize, don't you, that you are the temple of God, and God himself is present in you. Do you know that when God wants to throw a wing out of your house here and build a tower here and tear the roof off there and knock out this wall here, you know why he's doing that? Because he's the king and he's moving in with you. And you deserve to live in a palace designed by the king, not a palace of your design. You thought you were going to end up with a nice cottage, and he's building something palatial. And you say, no, God, Paul goes on, he says, no one will get by with vandalizing God's temple. You can be sure of that. Because God's temple is sacred. And you, remember, you are the temple. Remember, that's what changed. When Jesus came and he established the new covenant, the old temple system was done away with. And he says, you don't have to come to the tabernacle. I no longer have my presence in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle. No, he says, I'm going to make a temple out of you and me. And I'm going to live in you. But he's not going to force himself to do that. He's not going to force himself. He's not going to take from you what you're not willing to give up. So, what's the antidote to the catastrophe of comparison? The antidote is the contentment of permission. Can you be content? Can I be content to let God do what God wants to do? Or are we going to dictate to him the plans? Are we going to say, God, this is what it's got to be? And I know the wrestling, I know the pain, I know the heartache. Because we want to tell God what we think is best for us. God, what's best for me? And I remember telling God this. What's best for me is that my wife recovers from cancer. She doesn't die from cancer. That's what's best, God. And I finally had to give God permission to do what God was going to do anyway. There's contentment in giving God permission to be God. The contentment does not come without pain. It doesn't come without heartache. It doesn't come out without discomfort. It doesn't come without you and I being put on the edge and wondering if we're going to be able to hang on or not. But it comes. So here's where I want to land this morning. Here's what I want you to hear more than anything else. My friends, if you're struggling with the catastrophe of comparison and you long for contentment in Jesus, there are three things that I want you to pursue, and I want you to pursue them with all your life, with everything you have. Not starting tomorrow, but starting in 2 minutes. Okay, the first one is I want you to get down on your knees. I want you to pray, and I want you to beg God to show you the areas in your life where you have taken back permission for him to do what he wants to do. For him to be the Lord, the King, the leader, the master, the boss of your life. What are you refusing right now? What are you saying, God, anything but that? Second, You need to make sure you're in some kind of a circle with some kind of group of people that you're doing life with that can pray with you and help you see what you can't see on your own. Because I'm telling you, friends, there are all kinds of things that we deal with in our lives, pride and selfishness being two of the primary ones that we can't see when we look in the mirror. Only other people can see those things in us. Because when we look in the mirror, we don't see those things. We need to be with a group of people. We need to do life with a group of people that helps us see that. And then if the struggle is tough, if the struggle is painful, if the struggle is so hard that you don't know how to make it through, then you need to get help. And you get help. We will refer you to help. Believe me, I can't help you, but I know people who can, and I know a God who can. And I'm putting it right out here, my email address and my phone number. If you need help, don't delay. Contact us. Contact me. We will find you help. Because the reality of it is that this comparison game is a catastrophe, and lives are being torn apart. Marriages are being shredded. Relationships between brothers and sisters are falling apart. Parents and children are in conflict with each other and at each other's throats. They were yelling at each other on the way to church this morning. And Jesus says to us, look, I want to be the Lord and the Master. I want to be the architect. I want to be the builder. I want to be the general superintendent. Get out of my way. Let me do what I want, but I'm not going to do that without permission. And he's waiting for you and me to give him permission to do what he wants to do with our lives. He's waiting for us to say, Lord, you know, we sang the song, I've seen you do it before, and I know you can do it again. You've never failed me. I don't expect you to fail me now. We say to him, God, you're the artist. You're the potter. I'm just the canvas and the clay. Forgive me for all the times that I try to be the artist and the potter. Help me to keep my hands off the easel and away from the wheel. He's waiting for you and me to come to him with that kind of an attitude. And you know, my friends, if we could do this, this is what I know. Life will change for you. Life will be better for you, and you will be better at life. Because God comes in and he has this way of taking all the things that we've hung on to, all the junk in our lives, and he has a way of moving it out of the way and helping us focus on the things that are really important. And what's really important? One man came and he died that you could live. That's what's important. And our lives, our community, our church, we would be different if we give him permission.